The cafeteria buzzed with the familiar chaos of lunchtime at Riverside Elementary. 80-year-old Emma Martinez sat at the far corner table, her small hands carefully unwrapping 2 pieces of plain white bread and unscrewing the cap from a plastic water bottle. The simple meal looked stark against the colorful array of packed lunches surrounding her. 3 tables away, Madison Chin opened her bento box filled with sushi rolls, fresh fruit, and fancy crackers. She nudged her friend Tyler, pointing at Emma with a smirk. "Look at the bread girl again," Madison whispered loud enough for others to hear. "Does she ever eat real food?" Marcus Williams moved quietly between the lunch tables, his gentle eyes taking in every detail of the children's interactions. As the head cafeteria worker, he had witnessed this scene too many times, but today something in Emma's posture made his chest tighten. The little girl sat perfectly still, staring down at her simple meal while whispers and giggles floated around her. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe school lunch situations like this are common where you live too. Marcus approached Emma's table, his voice warm and steady. "How are you doing today, sweetheart?" Emma looked up briefly, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of embarrassment and resignation that no child should carry. Emma managed a small smile and nodded, but Marcus noticed how she hunched her shoulders when Madison's laughter carried across the room. The other children at Madison's table had joined in now, their voices creating a chorus of cruel whispers that seemed to follow Emma wherever she went. Marcus had worked at Riverside Elementary for 8 months, ever since he had made the decision that changed everything. Most people saw him as just another cafeteria worker, someone who served food and cleaned tables, but his trained eye caught details others missed. He noticed which children came to school hungry, which ones ate alone, and which ones carried burdens far too heavy for their small shoulders. Emma took a small bite of her bread, chewing slowly while keeping her eyes fixed on the table. Marcus remembered his own daughter Sophia at home, the same age as Emma, who would be eating a carefully prepared lunch at her private school across town. The contrast made his heart ache in ways he tried not to think about during working hours. Tyler Johnson stood up from Madison's table and walked toward Emma, his sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum. He stopped directly in front of her table, his voice loud enough to attract attention from nearby students. "Hey Emma, my mom packed extra cookies today. Want some?" His tone carried a false sweetness that made Marcus tense. Emma looked up hopefully, and Marcus saw the flicker of genuine gratitude in her expression. Then Tyler pulled his hand back with a cruel grin. "Just kidding. Maybe ask your mom to pack real food next time." The other children erupted in giggles, and Emma's face flushed deep red as she looked back down at her simple meal. Marcus felt his jaw clench as he watched Emma's shoulders shake slightly. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, but he knew the delicate balance he had to maintain. As a cafeteria worker, he could offer kindness and support, but stepping too forcefully into disciplinary territory might cost him his position and his ability to help children like Emma. He moved closer to Tyler's table, his presence alone enough to make the boy's confident smirk falter. Tyler quickly returned to his seat, suddenly very interested in his elaborate lunch container. Marcus made mental notes of the children involved, understanding that this pattern of behavior didn't happen in isolation. Emma finished her bread in small, careful bites, each one seeming to require tremendous effort. She avoided eye contact with everyone around her, creating an invisible bubble of protection that broke Marcus's heart. He had seen this before in board meetings, in corporate environments where people learn to make themselves small to survive. But this was an 80-year-old child who should be laughing with friends, not strategizing survival. The lunch bell would ring in 10 minutes, and soon Emma would return to her afternoon classes carrying this shame with her. Marcus wondered about her home situation, about parents who sent a child to school with bread and water. His analytical mind, honed by years of running complex business operations, began cataloging questions that needed answers. Ms. Rodriguez, Emma's teacher, appeared in the cafeteria doorway, scanning the room with concerned eyes. Marcus had noticed her watching Emma more closely lately, and he respected the young teacher's genuine care for her students. She approached Emma's table with gentle authority. "Emma, how are you feeling today?" Ms. Rodriguez asked, settling into the chair beside her student. Her voice carried the warmth that had made her beloved among the children, but Marcus detected an undercurrent of worry that matched his own observations. Emma nodded quickly, too quickly, and mumbled that she was fine. Ms. Rodriguez glanced at the empty bread wrapper and water bottle, then looked around the cafeteria with the same protective instincts Marcus had been feeling. She noticed the cluster of children at Madison's table watching them with barely concealed amusement. Marcus continued his rounds, but his attention remained focused on the quiet conversation between teacher and student. He had developed an ability to listen while appearing busy, a skill that served him well in both his previous corporate life and his current role. Emma was telling Ms. Rodriguez about a book she had been reading, her voice growing slightly stronger when discussing something she enjoyed. The dismissive snorts from Madison's table grew louder, and Marcus saw Tyler lean over to whisper something that made the other children laugh. Ms. Rodriguez's posture stiffened, and Marcus knew she had heard it too. The teacher's protective instincts were clearly warring with the same professional constraints that limited Marcus's ability to address the situation directly. Principal Harrison entered the cafeteria, his expensive suit and authoritative stride commanding immediate attention from staff and students alike. Marcus had learned to read the man's moods, and today's expression suggested impatience with anything that might disrupt his carefully maintained school efficiency. Harrison's eyes swept the room, cataloging problems that needed swift resolution. Principal Harrison approached Ms. Rodriguez with brisk efficiency, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Ms. Rodriguez, I need those assessment reports by 3 o'clock. We can't have any delays with the district review coming up." His tone suggested that student conversations were less important than administrative deadlines. Ms. Rodriguez glanced at Emma, clearly torn between her students' needs and her principal's demands. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. I'll have them ready." She squeezed Emma's shoulder gently before standing, whispering that they would continue their conversation later. Marcus watched this interaction with growing frustration. In his previous life, he would have handled situations like this with direct authority, ensuring that human needs took precedence over bureaucratic efficiency. Now, he had to observe from the sidelines as a caring teacher was pulled away from a vulnerable child. Emma sat alone again, and the vultures immediately circled. Madison stood up with theatrical flair, announcing loudly that she felt sorry for people who couldn't afford real food. "Maybe we should start a charity," she declared, her voice dripping with false sympathy that made several children giggle appreciatively. Tyler joined the performance, suggesting they could collect spare change to help buy Emma a real lunch. Other children began reaching into their pockets, pulling out coins and waving them in Emma's direction. The mockery had evolved into public humiliation, and Emma's face had gone completely pale. Marcus felt something dangerous stirring in his chest, a protective fury that he hadn't experienced since Sophia had been bullied at her previous school. His hands gripped the cleaning cloth tighter as he fought to maintain his carefully constructed persona while watching a child's dignity being systematically destroyed. Emma's water bottle slipped from her trembling hands, clattering to the floor and rolling under the table. The sound seemed to echo through the cafeteria, drawing even more attention to her distress. She bent down to retrieve it, and Marcus saw tears threatening to spill from her eyes as the cruel laughter continued around her. Marcus moved with purposeful calm toward Emma's table, his years of executive presence surfacing despite his humble uniform. He knelt beside her chair, his voice low and steady. "Emma, would you like to help me in the kitchen for a few minutes? Sometimes it's nice to have a quiet space when things get overwhelming." The genuine kindness in his offer seemed to surprise Emma, who looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. Madison's performance faltered slightly as Marcus's presence shifted the dynamics in the room. The other children sensed something different about the cafeteria worker's demeanor, though they couldn't quite identify what made him seem suddenly more commanding. Principal Harrison noticed the interaction from across the room and frowned. "Marcus, please don't interrupt the students' lunch period with unnecessary activities. They need to finish eating and return to class on schedule." His tone carried the dismissive authority of someone who viewed efficiency as more important than compassion. Marcus stood slowly, his eyes meeting Harrison's with a level gaze that momentarily unsettled the principal. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. I was simply ensuring that all students have what they need for proper nutrition." His choice of words was precise, carrying subtle weight that suggested deeper knowledge than a typical cafeteria worker might possess. Harrison's expression shifted slightly, as if he sensed something unusual in Marcus's response, but couldn't quite place it. The principal's eyes narrowed briefly before he turned away, muttering about maintaining proper boundaries between staff and students. Emma remained frozen in her chair, the cruel spectacle around her continuing as Madison encouraged other children to join their mock charity drive. The coins clinked together in their hands, creating a soundtrack of humiliation that made Marcus's protective instincts surge even stronger. He had faced boardrooms full of hostile executives, navigated complex corporate politics, and made decisions affecting thousands of employees. But watching an 80-year-old girl endure systematic cruelty tested his self-control in ways those high-stakes meetings never had. His daughter Sophia's face flashed in his mind, reminding him why he had chosen this path of quiet observation and careful intervention. Marcus resumed his cleaning duties, moving closer to Madison's table while appearing to focus on wiping down surfaces. His proximity alone seemed to make the children slightly uncomfortable, though they continued their performance with less enthusiasm. He had learned that sometimes presence spoke louder than words, a lesson from years of reading room dynamics and understanding power structures. The lunch period was nearly over, but the damage to Emma's spirit seemed to deepen with each passing moment. Marcus watched her carefully rewrap her remaining bread, her movements mechanical and defeated. He knew that patterns like this rarely resolve themselves, and his analytical mind began formulating approaches that might address the situation without compromising his carefully maintained position. The next morning arrived with autumn's crisp bite, and Marcus noticed Emma's absence immediately as students filed into the cafeteria for breakfast. Her usual corner table sat empty while Madison and Tyler claimed their regular spots, already whispering and glancing toward Emma's vacant chair with anticipatory smirks. When Emma finally appeared, she moved even more slowly than usual, her face pale and drawn. Marcus observed her careful navigation through the lunch line, selecting only a small container of milk with hands that trembled slightly. The simplicity of her choice spoke volumes about her family's financial constraints, and Marcus felt his analytical mind cataloging nutrition deficiencies that could affect her cognitive development. Emma had barely settled into her seat when Madison launched into her daily torment with renewed vigor. "Look who finally showed up," Madison announced to her table. "Did you forget to pack your fancy bread today?" The laughter that followed seemed sharper than before, emboldened by yesterday's successful humiliation campaign. Tyler stood up, pulling a granola bar from his lunchbox and walking toward Emma with exaggerated sympathy. "Here, charity case," he said loudly. "My mom always packs extra for people who need help." He dropped the bar on Emma's table, but when she reached for it gratefully, he snatched it back with a cruel laugh. That was when Emma's body finally betrayed her. The combination of inadequate nutrition, stress, and public humiliation proved too much for her small frame. She swayed in her chair for a moment, her eyes unfocused, before slumping forward and sliding from her seat to the floor with a soft thud that silenced the entire cafeteria. Marcus moved with lightning speed, his trained instincts overriding any consideration of professional boundaries. He knelt beside Emma's unconscious form, his fingers automatically checking her pulse while his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to crisis management. "Everyone step back and give her space," he commanded, and the children immediately obeyed without question. The transformation in Marcus's demeanor was instant and complete. Gone was the quiet, deferential cafeteria worker. In his place stood someone who radiated competence and control, someone who clearly knew exactly what to do in an emergency situation. He gently positioned Emma's head, checking her breathing while simultaneously calling out specific instructions to nearby students. Madison and Tyler stood frozen, their cruel game forgotten in the face of real consequences. The granola bar lay scattered on the floor where Tyler had dropped it, a stark reminder of the cruelty that had pushed Emma to this breaking point. Other children whispered anxiously, suddenly understanding that their entertainment had become something much more serious. Principal Harrison burst through the cafeteria doors, drawn by the commotion and the unusual silence that had replaced the typical lunch chaos. "Marcus, what's the situation?" Harrison demanded, but something in Marcus's posture and the way he handled the emergency made the principal's authoritative tone falter slightly. Marcus looked up from Emma's still form, his eyes meeting Harrison's with unmistakable intensity. "This child is suffering from malnutrition and stress-induced collapse," he stated with clinical precision. "We need immediate medical attention, and we need to address the systematic bullying that contributed to this crisis." His words carried weight that made Principal Harrison take an involuntary step backward. The school nurse arrived within minutes, but Marcus had already stabilized Emma and begun implementing proper emergency protocols with the efficiency of someone who had managed far more complex crises. Emma's eyes fluttered open as the nurse checked her vital signs, and Marcus's voice became gentle again as he reassured the frightened child that she was safe. Principal Harrison watched this interaction with growing confusion and unease. "Marcus, I need to speak with you privately about overstepping your role here," Harrison said, his voice regaining some of its administrative authority. "You're the cafeteria staff, not a medical professional, and there are proper procedures for handling student emergencies." Marcus stood slowly, his full height and commanding presence becoming unmistakable for the first time since he had started working at the school. "Mr. Harrison, with all due respect, I think we need to discuss what proper procedures actually look like when a child's welfare is at stake." His tone was measured, but carried an undercurrent of steel that made several nearby teachers pause in their conversations. Harrison's face flushed red with irritation. "I don't know who you think you are, Marcus, but in this school, I make the decisions about student welfare and staff responsibilities. You need to remember your place and stick to serving food and cleaning tables." The principal's voice had risen enough to attract attention from remaining students and staff. Marcus looked directly into Harrison's eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had commanded boardrooms and made decisions affecting millions of dollars. "Mr. Harrison, my name is Marcus Williams, and I'm the CEO and founder of Williams Food Distribution Company. I've been working here for 8 months, conducting firsthand research on childhood nutrition in public schools." The cafeteria fell into complete silence. Principal Harrison's mouth opened and closed without sound, his face cycling through disbelief, embarrassment, and dawning recognition. Ms. Rodriguez, who had rushed in during the commotion, stared at Marcus with wide eyes as the pieces suddenly clicked into place. Marcus continued with calm authority, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "After my wife passed away 3 years ago, I stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on my daughter Sophia and to understand the real impact of childhood hunger. I've been working directly with children to see how nutrition affects learning, behavior, and social development. What I've witnessed here confirms my worst fears about systematic neglect." Emma, now sitting up with the nurse's support, looked at Marcus with confusion and awe. The man who had shown her such kindness was someone incredibly important, yet he had chosen to work beside her, to see her struggles firsthand. The other children who had tormented her stood motionless, finally understanding the gravity of their actions. Principal Harrison struggled to regain his composure, his administrative bluster crumbling under the weight of Marcus's revelation. "Mr. Williams, I had no idea. If you had identified yourself properly from the beginning, we could have arranged appropriate meetings to discuss your research through proper channels." Marcus's expression remained steady, but his voice gained an edge that made Harrison step backward again. Mr. Harrison, the fact that my identity changes how you view my concerns about Emma's welfare tells me everything I need to know about this institution's priorities. A child's suffering should command the same urgent attention regardless of who points it out. Within 2 weeks, Riverside Elementary had transformed. Marcus's company implemented a comprehensive free breakfast and lunch program for all students, eliminating the stigma that had tormented children like Emma. The cafeteria now buzzed with excited conversations about nutritious meals rather than whispered cruelty about who could afford what. Emma's mother, Maria Martinez, had been hired as a coordinator for the new nutrition program, her intimate understanding of family struggles making her invaluable in identifying students who needed additional support. The steady income meant Emma now arrived at school with confidence instead of shame, her bright smile replacing the fearful hunched shoulders that had broken Marcus's heart. Madison and Tyler had undergone their own transformation through carefully structured conversations about empathy and consequences. Marcus had insisted on restorative justice rather than punishment, helping them understand how their actions had real impact on their classmates' lives. They now served as peer mentors, using their social influence to include rather than exclude. Principal Harrison had resigned quietly, replaced by Ms. Rodriguez, whose genuine care for students made her the natural choice for leadership. The school district had adopted Marcus's nutrition research as a model for addressing childhood hunger systemically rather than treating it as an individual problem. Marcus still visited the school regularly, though now openly as CEO and education advocate. Emma would run to greet him each time, her academic performance soaring now that her basic needs were met. The little girl who once sat alone with bread and water had become a confident student with dreams as vast as her potential. If this story touched your heart, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part or if you've witnessed similar acts of kindness in your community.